not to talk with the microphone because I tend to talk loud, but so I don't want to stand too close to it because you may get shouted out. The Army Corps of Engineers is also one of the main partners here. Paul's up front here as we break out and talk. If there's anything Corps-ish, you think, because the Corps in their olden days of how they did things, the concrete channel is a result of that. Back in the 60s, the planning, in the 70s, building it. The one thing that we're looking at this corridor as is we're not going to be touching the concrete channel and removing it, because there's a reason it was put in back then because of flooding, and we totally understand in today's world with the higher intensity of rainfall events and stuff that, flooding is still a concern and will always be. So the concrete channel will stay in place. That was one of the preliminary things the Corps did some analysis on. So the idea was, okay, you can't touch the concrete channel. How do you create habitat? And for any of us who live in Michigan and have driven from, the Detroit area up to Mackinac, or at least up north someplace, we've driven up 75, right? And you're on the concrete freeway going, and every once in a while you get tired or you gotta take a pit stop and you pull over to a rest station. Well, the idea behind a lot of this is twofold. One is to create some rest areas along the way so that the fish and other migratory birds and animals, as they come up the corridor, have a place to stop and rest. Some may stay and go, hey, this is pretty cool, I like to hang out here, start a family, and do. For those that have been in this area, there was an example. This is at the Henry Ford Greenfield Village. The oxbow that was put in there was one of the former oxbows, and an oxbow is just one of the old meanders of the way the river used to went, and when we put the concrete channel in, we cut them off, and they got filled in. So that one got opened up back in the early 2000s, and has seen an increase in fish population and other amphibians and the such over time as residents there. So again, that's the idea. If you build it, they'll come, but they'll also migrate through, which is good. So the idea behind a lot of these projects is to, in essence, provide resting areas, stopping, and not make it a big heat source. Because as you know, a lot of this area is open. So the temperatures go up. Avian birds, as they fly over, feel that heat source rising and will go around and stay away from it. Amphibians and the such will, again, move out of the area as well. So the idea is to create pockets and link things together that way. So it isn't one big project. It's a lot of small individual pocket projects, if you want to do it, that together, combined in this corridor, will help with the habitat, as Leah said, the habitat and what's called the beneficial use impairments of the fish and wildlife. The other thing that's happening, as many of you know, and I'm going to have Elizabeth Isler from Wayne County talk here briefly, is you may have heard about the Gateway Trail in the area. And the idea is, hey, you've got an access ability for people to see the river, be part of the river as that project develops, and then ours is kind of the habitat. So working together, intertwining those two, at least out on the main corridor, is one of the objectives of the habitat project as it relates to the Gateway project. So with that, I'm going to have Elizabeth talk briefly about where that is so that everybody kind of sees how all these things will link together, and then I'll come back to the other part.
Good evening. Hi, Elizabeth Isler, Chief of Planning for Wayne County Parks. As John said, these projects are working concurrently, which is great timing that we can do them together and make sure we're, designing things complementarily. And so this is a project that was way before me. It's been over 20, probably 30 years in design. The first phase was done where it started in Hines Park, if you're familiar with Hines Park. It starts there, goes through the community college, or Henry Ford College, then U of M Dearborn, and ends currently out on Michigan Ave. Phase one has been designed, and we do have funding for, would pick up off Michigan Ave go under all the craziness of the roads and end up on Village Drive, which is behind Greenfield Village. And then phase 2 is in design, which would go from there to Rotunda. So those two sections are, currently happening in design and hopefully construction soon. But then what's nice, again, with the timing of these is that we can make sure that they're complementing each other at the same time. So, good?
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Yeah, and just like I said, since that's kind of been going on its a track and people have known about that, it's like, well, wait a minute, is this part of that or is that part of this? They are two separate projects, but because of the timing, it is good because we're able to look at them both and interlink them together. The other thing as we break out, and if you want to talk, Grant Kosner from Jacobs Engineering is from the project team consultant there. He's the lead on this, so if anything goes wrong, you forget my email address and phone number and you call him and then he'll turn around and call me. So you might as well just call me straight. And what I'm gonna do now is talk a little bit about kind of some of the concepts you see. Again, these are concepts in talking with the landowners. Again, each of these have, other than the Wayne County section, which is easements up and down the corridor of the channel, they're private property owners. Dearborn Baptist is a private property owner of this site. So we've been working with them over the last couple of years to just kind of get a general idea of, hey, if we do this, what are your future plans for this site? Because one of the things we don't want to do is, come build something and then as part of their 5-year plan, they've got a parking lot to go put there. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. So we've been talking with them about what their future plans are on each of the sites. And, again, whether they're interested in moving forward with something. And that's where we're at this point. These are concepts that came out of those discussions, but we're at the point of, hey, what is everybody starting to think? Not only the landowners, but you and as public, just kind of like, hey, I've got an idea. I've thought about this. I heard about that. We want to kind of get that feedback tied into so we can make all these linkages link better together. And then when it comes to an individual site, like we talked about earlier with this site, how with what the church would like to do with the property and with how people flow through the property, how can we integrate, the public with the habitat? Because one of the things we've learned is if you all like it, or at least think it's worthwhile, it is, sustainable. Everybody talks about sustainability, this, sustain that. Well, it really comes from people understanding and wanting something in their community. Because if not, it gets abandoned down at some point in the future. May not be tomorrow, may not be the next day, but it's going to get abandoned. So what you see in front of you, and like I said, you're not going to be able to see them all real easy right now, but after we break and just kind of come up and we'll stand around and talk, is kind of the corridor from Michigan Avenue down to just south of Rotunda. Am I doing that? Greenfield, yeah, okay. So within that, that's the corridor we're looking at. Nothing outside of that. Like I said, the Oxbow project was done separately. There was a project up at the Henry Ford Estate with the dam up there. So there's been other individual projects, but this is the corridor for this one that we're looking at. As we kind of head down through it, these are laid out in kind of the order of going from Michigan Avenue down to the lower end, down to Greenfield, and then Site 9, and I'll kind of tell you what each of the sites are in a minute, is the concrete channel corridor itself. So Site 1 over here is the Henry Ford property. They have their pasture for the horses there, and that was one of the things in talking with them at the vet. They plan on keeping that as a pasture for the foreseeable future. So all we're really looking at doing is there's a small sliver of land between where Wayne County owns the easement at the top of the concrete channel and their fence line, and it's just going to be naturalized. So it'll just kind of be this blend of area between what the concrete channel is going through Wayne County part of Site 9 and then up onto theirs, and you'll be able to see that a little bit more. Because actually, as you look at this picture, that's the Gateway Trail, literally, and that's on the county's property, and the area to the right of it, when you look at it, is kind of just that little naturalized area. Again, native vegetation is what we're going to be placing in there, and some places may have, you know, a few structural type things, and by that I don't mean big structures. It's just kind of a rock pile or something like that for, you know, amphibians to warm themselves, or snakes or the such. And don't worry, Elizabeth, those piles will be far enough away from the path that people won't worry about a snake slithering across the path. So, or we'll make sure those are on the other side of the gateway, on the other side of the river. Site 2 is at the TPC. They're very interested in helping out, and in between the site is the CSO basin, the Hubble Southfield, that big concrete structure that you see. The idea is that is what we call Site 4 in between the structure, and it's a big heat island. You know, it's creating all this heat uplift into the air as birds fly over. Again, it's like, oh, I don't want to go down there. I don't want to, you know, stop and see what's going on because it's hot. So the idea with that is going to be, you know, some modular type of habitat up on top that they can move around because of maintenance concerns and that, and so that they can get to their things, and just making it a cooler environment, and not cool as in, hey, my kids want to hang out there, but cooler as in temperature, so that you don't have that heat updraft. On the TPC to the right on the picture, that is their big pond lake. The idea there is going to be, you know, creating some underwater habitat, enhanced habitat, deeper pockets, and possibly a connection to the river at a higher stage. So as high water flows come down, you do get some water exchange in and out. Again, these are all the theoretic concepts, nothing in stone, and nothing has been, you know, flushed out and designed. And then there is a wetland system currently that kind of goes around the CSO within the TPC. And again, it's to enhance, and through invasive treatment, getting rid of invasives, creating more structure in there, and, you know, more vegetation of native plants. Site 3 is what we're calling an upland pocket wetland. It's on the other side of the river from this one. It's also the Henry Ford owned. It's basically a piece of property that they don't plan on developing. They just want to leave it as natural. There's, you know, what we call vernal wetlands, which are basically wetlands that dry up at certain points in the summer and are, you know, in the spring and fall reform. Those type up in there, and the idea is to expand some of those, enhance some of those, create more of that. Again, there may be a chance to put some access trail through there. Again, this is all, since it's private property, we can't say, oh, we're going to open it up and everybody can come flooding in, because the idea is habitat first. But if we can, and, you know, they want it, then the Gateway Trail is going to go through by there along the outside corridor. That it would, hey, be a logical place that you could connect interior trails to. Where am I? 5 is Ford land property. Again, it's just right next to Site 3, so the idea would be kind of just connecting those two pieces together with whatever we do, more vernal pools and that type of thing. Site 6 is what we're on. We're on 6A. We split this into what's called 6A and 6B. 6A is going to reconnect to the river, which is part of the on TPC property, part of Wayne County property, and then flows up here onto the Dearborn Church property and kind of terminates here at Rotunda. There is a culvert that goes under there. For those that know the area, the Corwell Health side, that, you know, you can actually see the stream and the such on that side. So the idea, hopefully, would be to reconnect this entire oxbow all the way around, so to the river, and you would have flow back through it. Excuse me. Regardless, we've been, you know, with Beaumont, when it was Beaumont, was when we started the project. Now it's Corwell Health, and we kind of stepped away for about, you know, 18 months while everything was trying to be transitioned into the new project. We haven't reconnected with them to make sure they're on board. But the one thing that we do know is that regardless, the 6A part, because Dearborn and Church and the Dearborn Baptist and the TPC are both interested in it. And so without connecting the whole thing, we still have a very viable project, because you'll have what's created as a backwater wetland system that as the water comes up, you come in, it flushes it back out. And this area out here, which is all overgrown with invasives, the wetland itself will be deepened. Again, different types of pocket habitat within it, different types of vegetation. And then as we talked about with Pastor Josh when we were out here walking the site, how can we have certain places that you could stop and overlook? You know, can you have a walkway through and around it? Integrating that as part of what's going on. A and then B I talked about, which is the Corwell Health property, which would be basically reconnecting the other end to it for all intents and purposes, because the stream itself is in good shape. Maybe deepening the center channel a little bit. Site 7 is another piece of Ford property that would be creating an oxbow where one doesn't exist or hadn't existed before. It's just a small, small piece of property there that we create a channel. Again, another rest area for fish to pull off, hang out, catch their breath, and then head on back up the concrete 75 channel corridor. Site 8 is down at the very end by Greenfield, and again is Ford property. Is a little bit of a upland type thing. There's some wetlands up in there. The idea again is to expand and enhance those so that you have areas for amphibians and reptiles and the such, more habitat in that. And then as I talked about, Site 9 is the entire length, because that's the county's property, everywhere from the concrete channel up to all the individual properties. And the one thing, as we look at that, Site 9 in particular, you know, one thing that we always talk about is, oh, water temperature, how do you cool water temperature? Well, you put a lot more trees and things in that in, so you get canopy and it keeps things cool. That's all great, other than we have to definitely make sure that by doing that, we're not creating any more, I'll say, structural elements within the floodway, so as water comes down, we're not, you know, creating backups because of what we're doing. We don't, anything we do, we're not going to exacerbate any type of problem, which is a good correction from one of our documents that said, oh, we're going to exacerbate problems.
Since we just spent millions doing logjam removals upriver, you guys are going to thank you for taking that into account.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those when we first realized, it's like, you know, for those, I'm not a modeler, but there's some modeling geeks in our group that are like, oh, you know, the C coefficient, oh, you put this in, it's going to change that and do that. All that means is we need to have people check to make sure that exact thing is what was done before. We're not changing that by going and putting, maybe it isn't trees, maybe it is, we don't want to do trees because, oh yeah, you are going to do this. Oh, if you put one tree in, no big deal. You put 10 trees in, now you've got an effect. So those will be the things as you go through the design we'll look at. And instead, the natural area might just be, low type of native grasses so that, it doesn't cause, friction that then backs the water up. So that's kind of, I'll say, the overall general concepts of each of the sites. Again, these are just things that in talking with them, taking notes, going, oh, I'd like to do this, maybe, okay. And coming back and kind of drawing out a few things. Now the idea is for the next 18 months, I'll say, in general timeline, plus or minus, is to actually get the designs done and then look to start construction in a couple of years. And the idea, it would be one package so that we'd have one contractor, which means each site wouldn't all be going at the same time. So it would take a couple of years. Maybe we're looking at a total time frame of a 5-year period in general of construction, maybe less. And then depending on the design. So this isn't like, oh, we're gonna do this. By the way, we're gonna have trucks coming down here next week. Be prepared. No, we're right at the beginning process, and that's why we want the feedback. Speaking of feedback, when you came in, there's a couple of things you may have picked up. One is a card, and one is a flyer. This is just a straight traditional comment card that you can write your comments on. There's pens and stuff in the back and leave with us. There's also a scan here, which you can take home and fill out any information you'd like us to know later. Same with this. It's just a short survey. It's more or less asking kind of the same, how'd you hear about things, so that we can get information out better based on what you guys are hearing or how you're getting the information. So there's a couple of questions here. Again, you could fill it out and leave it with us, or again, there's a Scantron here that will take you to the survey. Additionally, there is a project website. Where's Chris? The one time, there she is. Project website's name is, it's actually probably on here, John, look. Okay, yes, it's on this form. So yes, please feel free to go there and see project updates as you go. The one other thing I'll point out, there's some banners in the back. The one thing we always want to talk about, regardless of, we're always building habitat and stuff, but water quality starts and ends with us at home as easily as doing these bigger projects. So some of the things you talk about is that you see in the banners back that the Alliance of Rouge Communities has put together is just how a watershed works, what you can do at home to basically help us make these things sustainable when we spend the money to build them. With that, I'm done rambling. So either one or two things. This is kind of your show from now on. If you want to sit there and ask questions, that's fine. Otherwise, like I said, we'll just kind of be hanging out here, and if you kind of come up and take a look, go point to that and go, whoa, what's that, or why in the heck did you even think of doing that? Do you know, if you do that, this would happen up here, that type of stuff. Or if we did such a great job, you can, leave fill out the survey, which doesn't have it, but you could add it at the bottom that MC guy was the best I've ever heard, and, we should have him at all our, parties and events at home. So with that, I'll take any questions now, or like I said, feel free to come up and we'll just kind of talk, from the boards. We didn't do it as a PowerPoint just because we felt it was better to kind of just talk. And we can move these around if everybody's congregating next to two, maybe we'll break those up and move a couple to the back or such.